Welcome to our second video blog. It's been an incredibly unseasonably dry month, so we're now at the end of April and we've had about 5% of the rain that we should have had for this month, which particularly where we are in West Yorkshire we're just not used to, so a lot of the plants are really suffering. Unfortunately though, it wasn't the drought that killed this kale tree, it was the frost that we had earlier in the year. In the yard here, the ground froze solid for about a week. Because of where we are on a north-facing slope, we didn't get any sun at all through the winter. So when it was really cold and it froze, most places defrosted a bit during the day with the sunshine, but in the yard we didn't get any sun at all, so the ground just stayed absolutely frozen solid for a week. And with the kale, the perennial kale being evergreen, it was actually in active growth through the winter, so whilst the ground was frozen solid it couldn't access any water and it just went past its permanent wilting point and never recovered. So now it's just completely crispy and bone dry. But as I say, I don't think it was actually the frost and the cold that killed it, because we have quite a few of the kales around and about that aren't in the yard that survived and are doing well. And it was just that this part of the yard doesn't get any sun, so the ground was completely solid. And the same for the Dorbenton panache that we had around here, that also all just dehydrated and died off. So we're going to have to rethink this entire bed. As I mentioned before, the ground here is now quite bare. I had been planning to give the kale panache quite a good prune this year anyway, because it had really taken over, and you know where it was growing it's just killed everything off. So I've now got an opportunity to rethink this space. I haven't really decided exactly what to put in here yet. This bit is quite sunny in the summer, you know, it gets a lot of sun this time of year, even though it gets none in the winter. So I've got an opportunity to plant some real sun-loving things in this side. But when our next kale grows up, because I'll be replacing this with another one, then that side will be in shade again. So I might mix in some annuals this year to make the most of the sun, and then give me an opportunity to plant some more shade-loving things once the other kale has grown up again. The kale shades this bed, which is quite nice because it does get quite sunny, so it's nice to have that difference in what you're growing, so I can add some extra shade loving things in the yard as well, because most of the beds get a lot of sun. But I'm actually going to, when I plant the new kale, I'm going to move it back a bit so that most of the shade falls on the paving and we just get a bit more space here for the sun. And the birds absolutely love perching in here, so that's been brilliant for them. And because we're losing that vertical, I'm going to put in a couple of obelisks. I've made this one just now, so I'm going to put a couple of obelisks in, and I'm going to be growing things like peas and beans up those, just to give us a bit of vertical space. So I'm just going to be having a think over the next week or so about what I can plant in here to make the most of the opportunity that I have now the kale has died off. This is where we've put some kale cuttings in a few years ago now, so they've been growing on. This is where I'm going to take one to replant the kale in the yard. I did put a cutting into the yard, but it's grown very, very thin and spindly, so I'm wanting something that's got a bit of a stronger trunk to it. So I'll be taking one of these out, and then we'll just be taking off the side branches, crown lifting it so it forms a trunk with a tree, and it'll need staking as well, as once the top half gets bigger it won't be able to support itself in the ground. I've also got some seedlings. Our Taunton Dean in the yard did flower once a few years ago, so we decided to sow the seeds and see what we ended up with, but in all honesty most of the seedlings look identical to the parent. But we'll grow them on and see if anything interesting comes out of them. cut all the branches off the top. I've taken out the supports, and now I'm going to just saw off the base. I'm not going to try and dig it out. We try and do no dig and disturb the soil as little as possible. There's lots of other plants growing around it, including this other cutting. So I'm going to just saw off the base and leave the roots in, then they'll just rot down and add to the organic matter in the soil. I'm not sure if brassicas show rings in the same way as trees, but this is 4 years old, this one, and you can see here the different growth rings, so I'm assuming it grows the same way as a tree, so that's quite interesting. I've just come up the hill here to take some branches off this flowering pear. It's flowering at the same time as the pears that are in the yard, but as both the pears that are in the yard are both Dorundo, they can't pollinate each other because they're obviously the same tree, clones of the same tree. So I've come to get some of these branches of pear with flowers on, because this one is conference, and so that way it will pollinate the ones in the yard as the bees visit the flowers from the branch that I've put in a bottle. So I'm just going to chop a bit off here. What I've tried to get is some with flowers that are still to open, as there's quite a few flowers on the pear in the yard which are still to open, so I'll gather another piece and then go and hang them on the tree in the yard. I've just popped the pear into a glass bottle. We have these bottles that we found when we were out on a riverbank, where you can use anything that will hold water and that you can tie with a bit of string. So I'm just going to tie these up. I'll put some water in the bottle, and that way it keeps the branch fresh for a little while over the next week or so whilst the flowers are out. And then as the bees and other pollinating insects travel around the plant, then hopefully some of them will visit this branch as well, and then that will help to cross-pollinate the pear, and then we should get really good fruit set. We did this for the first time a few years ago, and it really made quite a huge difference to the yield that we ended up with, so now we do it every year. It's been a really busy month or so at work and with the children, so we just haven't really had a chance to get in the yard very much. I meant to prune this bay tree about a month ago and it just didn't happen. So it just shows what a really low maintenance garden it is, because I think I've probably spent about 2 hours in the last 6 weeks doing any kind of maintenance in the garden. So I'm just going to give the bay tree a bit of a cut. We've crown lifted it so that we've got all this space underneath for growing other things, and it's just getting a bit top heavy and starting to fall forwards a bit. So I'm just going to cut off pieces from round here, and of course you can dry these out, put them in a jar, and then you've got some to use year round, or give some to a friend. If someone doesn't have a bay tree, it's quite a nice thing to have. I'm just going to cut some bits off here. As I'm cutting back, I'm trying to just cut back to where the next leaves are. So if I cut right out here, we're going to end up with this bit that'll die back. So the best thing to do is cut back to a leaf, and then we don't have dead and dying bits all over the place. This main bit out. You can choose to cut it back to any shape that you like, or you can decide you're not really that bothered about what shape it is. You can do it as a neat topiary or something more natural. Really, I'm just taking some off so it doesn't get too big for this space. Don't really need that much bay. And actually it's quite surprising, considering how cold it did get, that there wasn't any frost damage whatsoever on this bay. It was really more the fact that the ground froze for such a long time that was the problem. And when I'm pruning anything, I just like to stand back, have a bit of a look, see which bits look out of place, and then I can go back in. As I say, I'm not going for perfect topiary here, I'm just going for taking a bit of the size out of it, really. Right, finished the pruning now. Certainly reduced in size. Much better size for this bed here. And also now I've noticed that there's this sucker down here, and if I can just pull it off here, then I can stick this in the ground and I should be able to grow another plant from this. I've just taken out some of this lavender mint. It smells absolutely wonderful, but just like with any mint, it's just been spreading like crazy. So I'm just taking some off the front edge here. It's not a very tall mint, so I don't mind it too much, just spreading around in the bed there. And it really does smell amazingly like lavender. So it's nice to have that, because lavender doesn't really seem to like it very much in our yard. So I've dug that out here, and really what I'm wanting to do is, I really love this oregano. It's a golden one. It's got this really beautiful sort of bright, zesty, yellowy green colour. So I want to spread it a bit more along the front of this bed, but also in some of the other beds as well, to sort of bring all the beds together a bit, because at the moment there's sort of really like 3 separate beds. So I'm trying to get a few things along the front edges that are in common, so it brings it all together a bit more. So I'm just going to divide this. I've tried lifting and dividing it before in the autumn, but it just all rotted. The plants didn't seem to like sitting with their roots just prized apart in the autumn. So I'm going to try it now. And actually you can lift and divide plants any time of year. I mean, people say ideally when they're dormant in the winter, but quite often you will find things rot before they get going. So I quite often like to divide things when they're in active growth, and then they immediately start growing new roots. The main thing is just keeping them really well watered so that they don't dry out and die off. So really, whenever I'm digging anything up, I'm never quite sure how I'm going to divide it, whether I'm going to use a spade, or you can use 2 forks, put them in and try and prise it apart. So I'm going to give that a go. It's quite woody, so I'm not quite sure if it's going to come apart easily. I think it's not. So I just might have to try with the spade. There we go. Yeah, it doesn't seem to want to come apart very easily. Have a look. I think actually I might just use a secateurs in there to split some bits off. So there you can see we've got some roots and some shoots, so I can take this section now and plant it back in the ground, and then hopefully if I keep it well watered, bearing in mind we are in the middle of a drought, if I keep it well watered then that should get going. And I think what I might do as well, particularly as we're in the middle of a drought, is just take some of this top growth off here, just so it gives it a bit of a better chance not losing too much moisture. So I'll do the same with this clump, and I've got another clump there. I've got also some of these viola here. This is Viola Sororia Freckles, and this one's done really well in the yard. It forms this brilliant sort of really dense mat of green, so it stops any of the weeds coming up, and it's quite good because it'll flower now early in the year, and then it's quite happy to then be shaded by other perennials growing over the top of it. So I've dug a few clumps up, and I'm just going to use the forks just to prise it apart and make it into just slightly smaller clumps. So I've got a few more to spread around, so just put the forks in back to back, and then you just push them against each other, and it just prizes the plant apart. And then you can see we've got some more clumps. I mean, I could split this down really small into individual bits like this. So long as they've got some shoot and some root, then that'll grow. So I could, if I wanted, split this down into really tiny clumps, but I think I'm probably going to leave it at about this size. I've got some other plants here as well that I'll be planting in and amongst other things within these 3 beds. I've got some things like lovage, some daylilies, some catmint. We've got this nice variegated astrantia which I'm going to put in for pollinating insects. So the next time we do the video blog, our next one, hopefully I'll have all those in, and I'll be able to talk a bit about the new plants that I've put within the garden.